She lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else, a place where things usually moved slowly, and surprises were rare. People would wake up, go to work or school, and the day would pass quietly, almost exactly like the day before. But the little girl was different. From a very young age, she carried a spark in her eyes, a curiosity that seemed bigger than the town itself. While other children played and ran about, she would sit quietly for long periods, observing, listening, and asking questions that sometimes left adults unsure how to answer. Her home was modest, with a small garden in the backyard that she loved more than anything. She spent hours there, examining every leaf, every flower, every bug she could find. She would talk to her mother and father about the patterns she saw, about the colors of petals or the way ants marched in perfect lines, and though they tried to understand, they often found her thoughts surprising. It wasn't just her curiosity. It was the depth with which she looked at the world. Adults often assumed she was too young to notice such details, but she noticed them all. Everything seemed connected to her, and she wanted to know why. At school, she was quiet, not because she was shy, but because she liked to think before speaking. Teachers often thought she was timid or slow to understand, but in reality, she was absorbing everything. She watched how her classmates solved problems, how they spoke, how they reacted to mistakes. She watched everything carefully, learning more than anyone realized. Sometimes, during lessons, she would raise her hand with a question that made the teacher pause. It wasn't a question that had an easy answer. It was something that made the adults think and reconsider what they knew. Her classmates would whisper and giggle, but there was a sense of admiration hidden among the laughter. At home, her parents encouraged her curiosity but also worried. They loved her gentle nature, but they also knew the world could be harsh, and they wondered if people would understand her. Her father would sit with her in the evenings, looking at the stars through a small telescope. She would point out constellations, noticing patterns that adults often overlooked. Sometimes she would ask, "Why do the stars move like that? Is there a reason for the way they shine?" And he would smile, telling her that maybe one day she would find out. And she nodded quietly, as if she already knew she would. Her friends were few, and that suited her. She didn't need constant company. She enjoyed her own thoughts. When other children played outside, she would sit on the porch, sketching small drawings of the things she observed. Birds, trees, people walking by, even the patterns of clouds in the sky. Her sketches were detailed and precise, showing more than anyone her age could understand. She never showed them off much. She drew for herself, for the joy of capturing the world on paper. Neighbors often spoke about her in quiet tones. "She is quiet, isn't she?" one would say. "Yes, but there is something about her," another would reply. "I can't explain it, but she notices things no one else does." They watched her from their windows, sometimes shaking their heads in disbelief when she would point out small details, like a bird's nest hidden in a tree or a tiny flower growing between the cracks of the sidewalk. Most children wouldn't notice, but she did, and she seemed to understand what she saw. One chilly morning, she decided to explore the little creek that ran behind her house. It was early, and the mist hung low over the water. While other children might have stayed home or played with friends, she ventured alone, carrying a small notebook and pencil. She knelt beside the water and observed the way it flowed, the way the leaves floated, and the way small fish darted back and forth. She made notes and sketches, capturing the scene with careful precision. It was a simple creek, a simple morning, but to her, it was full of stories, full of questions waiting to be answered. Her parents watched from the kitchen window, sipping coffee and exchanging glances. "She is different," her mother said softly. "Yes," her father replied, "but maybe that is a good thing. One day, she might do something we cannot even imagine." They didn't know what that meant yet, but they felt a mixture of pride and awe. They knew she was special in ways they could not fully explain. School days continued much the same, with her sitting quietly, observing, learning, and sometimes surprising those around her. One day, her teacher gave a simple assignment: to draw a map of the town from memory. Most children struggled, drawing streets vaguely or missing landmarks, but she completed hers with incredible detail, including houses, trees, the creek, and even the smallest shops. When the teacher saw it, she gasped. "How did you know all this?" she asked. The girl shrugged lightly, smiling. "I just noticed," she said. The teacher showed the map to other faculty members, who were equally amazed. Nobody had expected a child her age to create something so precise and thoughtful. It was the first of many small moments that hinted at the extraordinary things she was capable of. As days turned into weeks, whispers began to grow in the town. People started noticing the little things she did. She could recall events from weeks before with perfect clarity, remember names and faces that most adults had forgotten, and always seemed to ask the right questions at the right time. Her reputation as a remarkable child began to spread, though she remained unaware of it. She was simply living her life, driven by curiosity, by the need to understand the world. One evening, her parents were talking quietly in the living room. "I think she might be more than just curious," her father said. "Yes, but what does that mean for her?" her mother replied. They worried about how she would be understood by the world, worried that people might expect too much from her or not understand her at all. Still, there was hope, a feeling that she might one day do something truly remarkable. And then one morning, something happened that would change everything. It was just another ordinary day, and the girl was walking to school when she noticed a small, injured bird on the sidewalk. Most children would have walked past, but she knelt down, gently picking it up. She carried it to school, asking the teacher for help and carefully tending to the bird. The compassion she showed surprised everyone, even her classmates who were used to her unusual talents. The little act of kindness was simple, but it spoke volumes about the depth of her heart and the way she viewed the world. It was a hint of the extraordinary combination of intelligence, observation, and empathy that would soon astonish everyone who knew her. That day, no one could have predicted the path she was on, the challenges she would face, or the amazing things she would accomplish. All they knew was that there was something about her, something different, something that made people pause and take notice. Nobody anticipated the girl, the depth of her thoughts, and the actions she was about to take. And yet, as she quietly carried on with her life, one thing was clear. She was ready to surprise the world in ways no one could imagine. It was a day like any other, or at least it seemed that way at first. The little girl woke early, the sun spilling golden light across her small bedroom. She got ready for school, tying her shoes carefully and smoothing her hair, though she paid little attention to the usual chatter and fuss of her classmates outside. She was focused, as she usually was, but there was a spark in her eyes that hinted something unusual might happen. At school, the morning lessons went on as normal. Teachers wrote on the blackboard, children answered questions, and the usual rhythm of the day continued. She listened carefully, noting small details that most of her classmates ignored. She noticed the way the sunlight hit the corner of the classroom, how the wind rattled the windows, and how a single leaf clung stubbornly to the tree outside. Most children would not have cared about such things, but she did. And those details, she sensed, were pieces of a larger puzzle, one that might reveal something extraordinary if she paid close enough attention. During recess, the little girl wandered off from the playground chaos. Other children ran and shouted, chasing balls and each other, but she walked quietly toward the old part of the schoolyard where a neglected garden lay. Here, weeds had overtaken flower beds, and a few broken benches leaned against the fence. To most, it was unremarkable, forgotten, and dull. To her, it was full of stories waiting to be discovered. She knelt down, brushing the soil with her small hands, examining tiny insects, the texture of the dirt, and the life hidden beneath the leaves. She began to think about what could be done to bring life back to this forgotten corner, imagining flowers blooming and butterflies resting on petals, and her mind raced with ideas. Then something caught her eye. A group of younger students had gathered near the garden, looking anxious. She walked over and found a small bird tangled in some old string, struggling desperately. She recognized the bird immediately as the same kind she had tried to help before, but now it was worse. Its tiny wing was caught, and it chirped frantically. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from urgency. She carefully untangled the bird, humming softly to calm it. Other children watched in awe, unsure what to do. When she finally freed it, she noticed its wing was bent in an unusual way. Without hesitation, she gathered materials from the classroom and the garden to make a small splint, wrapping it carefully with bits of cloth she found in her bag. The teachers arrived shortly after, drawn by the commotion. They had expected a simple scolding for children wandering off or making noise, but instead, they saw her crouched on the ground, gently tending to the injured bird. Their surprise was evident, and whispers passed from one adult to another. One teacher knelt beside her, asking, "Do you know what you are doing?" The girl looked up and smiled. "I think so," she said simply. It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet confidence, a knowledge that came from observing and learning carefully. The teachers exchanged glances. They had no idea she could act with such skill and calmness in a moment of crisis. Word of her actions spread quickly. Other students told their parents, neighbors passed it along, and soon even those who rarely paid attention to the children were talking about what had happened. But the little girl didn't care about the attention. She had only focused on the bird, on helping, on understanding how to fix what was broken. To her, it wasn't extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. Later that afternoon, the principal called her into the office. She entered quietly, holding her small notebook and pencil. The principal, a kind but serious woman, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I heard what you did today," she said. "It seems you have quite a talent for understanding and helping. Tell me, how did you know what to do?" The girl considered the question carefully. "I watched," she said. "I watched the bird. I watched what happened when it tried to move, and I tried to think about what it needed. It seemed like it needed support, so I made something to help it." The principal was silent for a moment, clearly impressed. It wasn't common for a child to act so thoughtfully, especially without instruction or guidance. The principal invited her to show the other teachers how she had helped. In the staff room, the little girl demonstrated carefully, explaining her thought process step by step. She talked about balance, about observation, and about patience. The teachers listened closely, taking notes and asking questions. One older teacher whispered to another, "I never expected a child to think like this. She sees the world differently, truly differently." That phrase captured the growing realization in everyone present. The little girl was not ordinary, and her mind worked in ways adults rarely saw in someone so young. Back in the classroom, things changed subtly. Students who once ignored her began to watch, curious. Some tried to learn from her, imitating the way she observed details and solved small problems. The little girl didn't mind. She continued quietly, helping when she could and observing the world around her. But she began to notice something else too. People were starting to expect the unexpected from her. There was a shift in how others perceived her, a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect. That evening, she returned home, still thinking about the bird and how fragile life could be. Her parents noticed her quiet mood, sensing that today had been more than a usual school day. They asked her about it, and she explained simply, as she always did, what had happened, how she had helped, and how she thought through each step. Her mother and father listened in silence, hearts swelling with pride. They knew the world was beginning to notice their daughter, though even they did not yet understand the full extent of what she could do. Over the next few days, small signs of her growing reputation appeared. A local newspaper caught wind of the story, sending a photographer to the school. The article was short, but it highlighted her calm thinking, quick problem-solving, and compassion. It was the first time people outside the town began to hear about the little girl who could surprise anyone. While the story itself was simple, a child helping an injured bird, it captured something extraordinary. People were fascinated not only by what she did, but by how she did it. Her careful, observant nature and willingness to act when needed left a lasting impression. As the days turned into weeks, the little girl continued her quiet routines, though with occasional interruptions from curious adults and reporters. She didn't seek attention. She never had. But the world seemed to notice her now, and she was beginning to see that her actions could reach far beyond her small town. Teachers, Neighbors and even strangers started to watch more closely, wondering what she would do next, though none of them could have predicted it. She also began to feel something new within herself, a quiet confidence that what she did mattered. She realized that careful observation and thought could lead to meaningful action. She understood that her small gestures, like helping a bird or noticing details others overlooked, were powerful in ways she hadn't fully appreciated before. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a seed of something much larger that was slowly growing. One afternoon, she was walking home from school when she saw a small commotion near the town square. A child had gotten separated from a parent and was crying, frightened by the noise of the busy street. Without hesitation, the little girl approached, speaking softly and calmly. She knelt beside the child, gently reassuring them and keeping them safe until the parent arrived. Once again, she had acted in a way that seemed beyond her years, a blend of calm, observation, and quick thinking that left adults astounded. By the time she returned home that evening, the little girl had begun to sense that the world would never quite see her as ordinary again. Each day, each small act, built upon the last, creating a quiet story of capability, kindness, and intelligence that no one could have anticipated. And while she continued to live her life in the small town, quietly observing, drawing, and learning, it was clear that her journey was just beginning, and the surprises she would bring to the world were only starting to unfold. Nobody expected a child like her to act with such precision and understanding, and yet, she did it every day, slowly changing the way people saw not only her but the possibilities in every ordinary moment. The little girl's life in the small town continued, but it was no longer as quiet as it once had been. The story of her helping the injured bird and guiding a lost child had spread, and people began to watch her more closely. Neighbors who had once considered her shy or ordinary now paused to see what she would do next. Teachers started noticing her attentiveness in ways they had not before. Her actions were small but precise, and each act left people wondering what she might accomplish if given a bigger challenge. One morning, a visitor arrived at the school. The principal explained that a team of specialists had come from the city. They worked in education and child development, studying how children learn and think. The experts had heard about the little girl and wanted to observe her. Nobody expected that their visit would turn into something extraordinary. The little girl greeted them politely, with a quiet confidence, as she always did. She didn't seem nervous, though adults expected her to be. She carried her notebook and pencil, ready to observe and take notes as she usually did. The specialists watched her through a series of simple exercises designed to understand her skills and thought processes. They expected average responses, maybe even some mistakes because she was only a child. But what they saw surprised them immediately. She solved problems quickly, demonstrating reasoning that was clear, logical, and insightful. She drew detailed diagrams that explained her thinking, showing patterns and solutions that none of the adults had considered. They exchanged glances, whispering to each other, clearly astonished. One of them muttered, "I have never seen a child respond like this before." Her classroom continued as normal while the experts observed, but she noticed them quietly. She noticed how they recorded their observations, the way they discussed what they saw, and the way they responded to her answers. She didn't feel intimidated or pressured. Instead, she used the moment to observe them as well, noting their reactions and learning from them. Her mind worked quickly, absorbing everything and applying it in ways that impressed even the trained professionals. During a break, the specialists asked her to complete a small task, to organize a group of children into teams for a game that required cooperation and strategy. Most children would have been confused, but she handled it with ease. She noticed the strengths of each child, assigning roles in a way that balanced skill and teamwork. Within minutes, the game ran smoothly, and the adults were amazed. They had anticipated some mistakes or hesitation, but she showed understanding of human nature, planning, and communication far beyond what was expected at her age. After the activities, the experts requested a private meeting with the principal and her parents. The little girl listened politely as they discussed what they had seen. They spoke in technical terms, explaining how rare her skills were, how her ability to observe, analyze, and act with precision was unusual even among older children. Her parents felt a mixture of pride and awe, realizing just how remarkable their daughter truly was. They had noticed her abilities for a long time, but hearing experts describe them formally made it real. One specialist said, "She not only understands the world around her, but she can predict patterns and respond with thoughtfulness. It is uncommon in children of this age. We are impressed by her ability to combine observation, reasoning, and empathy." Her parents nodded silently, feeling proud but also slightly concerned about the attention she might now receive. The little girl herself remained calm, as if she already knew what she could do, and was simply waiting for the right moment. After the visit, her parents noticed that the little girl seemed even more confident. She continued her routines, exploring, sketching, and observing, but now there was a subtle change. She began to approach challenges with quiet determination, thinking ahead and testing ideas carefully. She realized that people were starting to notice her abilities, and she wanted to continue proving herself, not for attention, but because she felt a responsibility to act thoughtfully and meaningfully. Word of her talents began spreading beyond the school. People in nearby towns, curious about the child who could surprise experts, started paying attention. Teachers from other schools contacted the principal, asking if they could visit and see for themselves. The little girl, as always, welcomed the visitors politely, demonstrating her abilities without any sense of boastfulness. She observed their questions, listened carefully, and responded in a way that made the adults rethink their assumptions. Each interaction left them quietly amazed, questioning what they thought was possible for a child her age home. Her parents saw her growing in confidence, not arrogance, but in a calm understanding of her own abilities. She helped with small tasks around the house, showing patience and insight beyond her years. She also continued to explore her surroundings, always asking questions, always observing patterns, and always seeking to understand the world more deeply. Her curiosity was now paired with experience and confidence, giving her a subtle authority that impressed everyone who interacted with her. One afternoon, she walked through the town square and noticed a small group of children trying to solve a problem with building a simple structure for a school project. They struggled, arguing and making mistakes. She approached quietly, observing their methods. After a moment, she suggested a small change, explaining why it would help. They listened, followed her advice, and the structure came together perfectly. The children were amazed, some calling her a genius, while others simply nodded, recognizing her skill. The adults who had witnessed the scene shook their heads in disbelief. Nobody had expected such an impact from someone so young. Her skills were not just in problem solving but also in understanding people. She noticed when someone needed help, even if they did not ask. She could sense frustration, confusion, or fear and respond in ways that calmed and guided. Adults who spent time with her often found themselves learning from her, not just in skill but in perspective. Her approach was quiet, patient, and thoughtful, yet it was powerful. People were beginning to realize that she was capable of much more than simple tasks or ordinary achievements. At school, her reputation continued to grow. Some children looked to her for guidance, some for inspiration, and some simply out of curiosity. She handled the attention with grace, never allowing it to affect her behavior or distract her from her observations and studies. Teachers began assigning her more responsibilities, recognizing her ability to manage tasks thoughtfully and efficiently. She became a quiet leader among her peers, someone who others could rely on without realizing how much influence she held. As weeks turned into months, the little girl began participating in activities that challenged her mind and problem-solving abilities. From science projects to community tasks, she approached each with careful observation and strategic thinking. Each success was small, but it built a foundation of recognition and respect. The specialists who had visited the school continued to follow her progress, amazed at how quickly she absorbed new information and applied it in practical ways. Her parents often reflected on how much she had grown in such a short time. They remembered the quiet, observant child who spent hours sketching and examining nature, and were now witnessing a child who could guide, teach, and inspire others. They felt proud but also knew that this was only the beginning. The little girl had a rare combination of intelligence, empathy, and calm determination that promised something extraordinary for the future. One evening, as the sun set over the small town, the little girl sat in her room with her notebook, sketching ideas and recording observations from the day. She thought about the people she had helped, the patterns she had noticed, and the lessons she had learned. She was growing aware that her abilities were unusual, that she could influence the world around her in ways that others could not. And yet, she remained humble, patient, and curious, qualities that made her even more remarkable. By now, nobody could ignore her. The little girl who had quietly explored her small world was becoming known far beyond her town. She had captured the attention of experts, teachers, and neighbors alike. Her thoughtful actions, combined with her ability to understand and guide others, made her an extraordinary presence. And although the story was still unfolding, it was clear that the little girl had begun a journey that would challenge expectations and inspire those who encountered her. Nobody anticipated what she could do next, and that was just the beginning. The day started quietly, with the soft golden light of morning filtering through the curtains. The little girl awoke as usual, calm and focused, but there was a sense in the air that something different was about to unfold. She went through her morning routine carefully, gathering her notebook and pencil, not yet aware that this day would be one she, and everyone around her, would remember for a long time. At school, the usual routine began. Lessons, reading, and quiet observation filled the morning hours. But today, the teachers had something special planned. A challenge had been set. A community science fair where students were encouraged to create projects that demonstrated their understanding of the world. Most children were excited, some nervous, and some unsure where to begin. The little girl, however, walked quietly through the classroom, already thinking about what she would do. She had spent weeks quietly observing patterns, gathering ideas, and noting small problems she could solve. Today, she would put all of her careful observations into action. Her project began simply. She set up a small demonstration showing the relationship between natural elements and energy, but she did it in a way that nobody had expected. She combined simple household materials with observations from her daily life. The way wind moved leaves, the way water flowed through the creek, the patterns she had noticed in the garden. As she worked, her classmates watched in curiosity, unsure what she was building. She explained little, preferring to let the results speak for themselves. When the time came to present her project, the room fell silent. Teachers, students, and even a few visiting parents leaned in, intrigued. She spoke with quiet confidence, explaining the principles she had observed, demonstrating how small changes could create big effects, and showing how her project solved a simple but important problem. Everyone listened, rapt. The complexity of her thinking, combined with the simplicity of her presentation, left people amazed. Adults exchanged glances, realizing that this was far beyond what they expected from a child her age. One of the experts from the city who had visited earlier to observe her was present at the science fair. They had anticipated good work, perhaps above average thinking, but what they saw stunned them. The little girl had combined observation, experimentation, and creativity in a way that was truly extraordinary. Her project not only demonstrated knowledge but also showed a depth of insight that made adults reconsider what was possible at such a young age. One expert whispered to another, "This is not just intelligence. This is understanding beyond her years." Her classmates cheered quietly, impressed by the results. Some had tried similar projects but failed to achieve the same clarity and impact. The little girl had taken ordinary materials, ordinary ideas, and transformed them into something that inspired awe. She had not aimed to impress, but her quiet focus and careful preparation did exactly that. The teachers realized that she had accomplished something rare. She had made a complex concept understandable, practical, and impactful, all at once. After the presentations, the judges approached her to ask questions. Each question she answered calmly, providing explanations that were clear, logical, and insightful. Her ability to articulate her thinking and reasoning astonished everyone. They expected simple answers, perhaps a few correct points, but instead, she demonstrated deep comprehension and creativity. The judges nodded to each other, clearly impressed, and whispered about the potential she had. Nobody had expected such maturity and depth from a child who seemed so quiet and ordinary just days before. Outside the fair, people began discussing her achievement. Neighbors, teachers, parents, and even people from other towns were talking about the child who had amazed everyone. Her reputation grew, not through boastfulness, but through action and results. She had proven, quietly but powerfully, that she could take observation, combine it with knowledge, and produce outcomes that shocked even the experts. The little girl, however, remained calm. She returned home, carrying her notebook filled with new observations and sketches. She thought about what she had learned, how the project could be improved, and what she might try next. Success did not change her focus. It sharpened it. She understood that her work mattered, not because of praise or recognition, but because of the potential to make a difference and understand the world more fully. Her parents were waiting, curious about the fair. When she explained what she had done, their pride was evident, but they were also struck by the maturity of her thinking. Her father said, "You've done something incredible today. I don't think anyone could have anticipated what you would do." She smiled quietly, nodding. She did not need approval. She needed only to continue learning, observing, and acting thoughtfully. Yet, in that moment, the reality of her impact began to sink in. People were noticing, experts were talking, and the small girl from the quiet town was starting to be seen in a new light. Over the next few days, invitations arrived from local organizations, schools, and even science clubs, asking her to present her work or participate in small projects. She considered each carefully, deciding where her efforts could have the most impact. She never sought attention, but she realized that her abilities could now be used to help others understand, learn, and create. This was a turning point in her life, where her quiet curiosity transformed into something that inspired and educated beyond her small world. At school, she continued to help her classmates quietly, showing them how to think critically and observe closely. She was not a teacher, but her peers learned from her example. They watched how she approached problems, how she noticed details, and how she calmly found solutions. Children who once ignored her began to seek her advice. Even teachers found themselves consulting her ideas, recognizing that her approach often revealed solutions they had overlooked. The little girl was not only achieving extraordinary results but also subtly changing the way people thought around her. One afternoon, she walked through the local park, noticing how trash and debris were affecting the environment. Most children would have ignored it or complained, but she saw it as a problem to solve. She spent hours designing a simple system to clean and recycle materials, using observations from nature to guide her methods. When she demonstrated her system to adults, including a visiting expert who happened to be in the town, they were amazed. She had turned a practical problem into a creative solution, demonstrating thoughtfulness, strategy, and care for the environment. Her work became a story in the local newspaper, highlighting how a small child could make a real difference. By now, nobody could ignore the little girl's abilities. She had done something that shocked experts and inspired her community. The combination of intelligence, observation, creativity, and empathy made her extraordinary. And yet, she remained humble, focused on learning and observing, always ready to face the next challenge. She was becoming a quiet force in the town, a presence that brought change and hope in ways that no one had anticipated. Even her classmates began to understand the impact of her actions. They learned that careful observation, patience, and thoughtful action could achieve results that seemed impossible. The little girl had not only demonstrated extraordinary skill but had taught, through example, lessons that extended beyond the classroom. People were beginning to see that talent and intelligence were not only about speed or grades but about careful thought, creativity, and empathy. As evening fell, the little girl sat in her room, reviewing her sketches and notes. She thought about the day, about the reactions of the adults, and about what she could do next. She understood now that her actions had power, that careful observation could change situations, and that even small solutions could have big impacts. And yet, she remained the same curious, thoughtful child, ready to observe the world and discover its next secret. The science fair and her project became a turning point in the little girl's life. It was the moment when she truly demonstrated what she was capable of, not just to the world, but to herself. Nobody expected a child so quiet and observant to accomplish something so extraordinary. And yet, she had calmly, patiently, and thoughtfully. The experts were stunned, her community inspired, and her parents proud beyond words. She had taken a simple idea, applied her observations and creativity, and produced results that changed how everyone saw her. And even though the day ended, it was clear that this was only the beginning of what she could achieve, as her journey toward astonishing and inspiring people continued. The little girl's life had changed in ways that were both visible and quiet. The small town she lived in had begun to notice her abilities, and people from outside were paying attention as well. Invitations for presentations, projects, and collaborations arrived at her home, though she did not seek them out. She focused on her daily routines, observing, sketching, and learning. But now, everything she did carried a weight of influence, even if she did not fully realize it. At school, she continued to participate quietly, helping her classmates with projects, showing them new ways to approach problems, and guiding them through challenges. Her influence was subtle yet powerful. Children who had once ignored her began to listen, and even some teachers found themselves inspired by the way she thought and acted. It was not only her intelligence that impressed, but her kindness, patience, and ability to understand people's needs. She had become a model not by force but through example. One afternoon, a local community center asked her to help organize a small event to raise awareness about environmental care. She agreed, carefully observing the layout, the materials available, and the ways people would interact with the space. She arranged activities, created informative displays, and guided volunteers, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The event was a success, and adults were amazed at how a child could manage so many details with such clarity and calmness. People began to share stories of her work, and she quietly became a symbol of what one thoughtful, observant child could achieve. At home, her parents watched with pride. They had seen her grow from a quiet, curious child into someone who could inspire and lead without seeking recognition. They remembered the early days, when she spent hours observing insects in the garden or sketching patterns in the clouds, and marveled at how far she had come. They also realized that her influence was more than just academic. She was teaching people around her to see the world differently, to notice details, and to act with care. News of her achievements began to reach neighboring towns. Teachers, specialists, and parents wanted to meet her, to observe how she approached learning and problem-solving. She welcomed visitors politely, showing them her methods, explaining her observations, and demonstrating solutions. Each interaction left adults and children alike inspired and reflective. They began to realize that talent and intelligence were not only about grades or speed, but about observation, thoughtfulness, and empathy. She quietly challenged their assumptions, making them rethink what they had considered ordinary. One day, a local newspaper ran a story about her, describing how a little girl from a small town had amazed experts with her projects and her ability to guide others. The article highlighted her humility and compassion as much as her intelligence. When her parents showed it to her, she read quietly and nodded. She did not feel pride in the usual way. Instead, she thought about what she could do next, how she could continue learning and helping. Her focus was not on recognition, but on understanding and action. Yet, the article helped others see her abilities and inspired many. In the classroom, she began to notice something new. Children who once hesitated to try now approached her for guidance, not only for answers but for understanding how to think. She explained her reasoning and encouraged them to observe carefully, to question, and to experiment. Her guidance was patient and gentle, helping others discover their own abilities. Teachers observed this quietly, realizing that she had become more than just a student. She was a mentor, though she did not hold a formal position. Her impact was organic, natural, and powerful. Outside school, the little girl continued to explore her environment. She noticed patterns in the trees, the movement of birds, the flow of water in the creek, and the changes in the weather. She sketched these observations, making notes of what she saw, and thinking about how small changes could create meaningful effects. Her curiosity remained as strong as ever, but now it was paired with experience, insight, and growing influence. She had learned that her observations could lead to action, and her actions could inspire others. One afternoon, while walking through the town square, she saw a small group of children arguing over a community garden project. Without hesitation, she approached, observing the situation calmly. She listened to their concerns, suggested changes based on her observations, and guided them to work together. Within minutes, the tension disappeared, and the project moved forward smoothly. Adults who witnessed this exchange were amazed at her ability to manage people, solve problems, and create collaboration. Her actions were not loud or forceful, but quiet, thoughtful, and effective. Once again, she had surprised people in ways no one expected. Her reputation continued to grow, but she remained humble and focused. She continued to explore, sketch, and observe, recording her findings in her notebook. She experimented with small inventions, tested ideas, and shared them with her peers. Each project, no matter how small, carried the same precision, care, and insight that had become her hallmark. People who observed her began to understand that true talent was not just in knowing, but in observing, understanding, and acting thoughtfully. Her parents often reflected on the journey. They remembered when she was just a quiet, curious child who spent hours exploring the garden. They saw how those small moments of observation and care had grown into a life filled with purpose, influence, and inspiration. They realized that her achievements were not only remarkable in themselves, but that they encouraged others to rethink what was possible. She had become a living example of curiosity, empathy, and intelligence in action. The little girl also began to notice the subtle ways she inspired others. Children and adults alike started to pay closer attention to details, to think before acting, and to approach problems more thoughtfully. Teachers adjusted lessons, neighbors began community projects, and even parents reflected on how they could see the world with more care and attention. Her influence spread quietly, growing from small actions into larger impact, all because she observed, thought, and acted. By now, experts who had first visited to observe her returned from time to time. They had expected to see occasional remarkable behavior, but they were consistently surprised by her ongoing growth. They took notes, studied her methods, and shared her story with others. Her ability to combine observation, reasoning, empathy, and creativity made her extraordinary, and her impact extended beyond her small town. She became an example for teachers, researchers, and parents, showing that potential could be found in quiet, thoughtful children, and that extraordinary results often came from patience, observation, and care. As she grew, she continued to quietly impact those around her. Her sketches became more detailed, her experiments more sophisticated, and her guidance more thoughtful. She remained humble, never seeking attention, but she understood that her actions could inspire others and create change. She had learned that being extraordinary was not about being loud or showing off, but about thoughtful action and understanding the world with clarity and care. One evening, as the sun set over the small town, she sat in her room reviewing her notes and sketches. She reflected on the past months, the projects, the experiments, the moments where she had helped others and been noticed. She understood that her journey was just beginning and that her actions, however quiet, had the power to influence and inspire. She realized that nobody had anticipated her abilities, and that was the beauty of her journey. She could quietly surprise the world, one thoughtful action at a time. Her story became known as one of quiet brilliance and influence. People in her town and beyond spoke about the little girl who observed, understood, and acted in ways that shocked experts and inspired those around her. But for her, it was not about fame or recognition. It was about understanding, learning, and helping others whenever possible. She remained the same thoughtful, curious, and observant child, but now the world had begun to see the extraordinary in her ordinary actions. And so, the little girl continued her journey. She explored, observed, sketched, and acted thoughtfully in everything she did. Her quiet influence grew steadily, showing that intelligence, empathy, and careful observation could inspire change and teach lessons far beyond the classroom or the small town she lived in. Nobody anticipated what she could do next, and that was the essence of her story. It was a story of curiosity, humility, and extraordinary impact, quietly shaping the world, one small action at a time.